Yay. Hey there, leader. Today on Conversations, we have Dr. Robert Huizinga. He has more than 25 years of pharmaceutical development experience and has been involved in the successful development of numerous compounds. He has lectured extensively and is recognized as an expert in immunosuppression drug development. Rob has numerous articles published in leading medical journals and is a member of many professional societies related to kidney disease, transplantation, and nursing. Rob holds a master's in medicine, which is in epidemiology from the University of Alberta, a PhD in organizational leadership from Regent University, is certified in nephrology, and a member of the Honor Society of Nursing. He holds a certificate in leadership from EQUIP Leadership and is an adjunct professor at the King's University in Canada. Dr. Huizinga, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It's a blessing to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you tell our listeners where in the world you're coming from today?
So I live in Victoria, Canada. So basically everybody knows Vancouver. And if you turn left on a ferry for about 90 minutes, you bump into this landmass called Vancouver Island. And that's where I hang out with my family and have been here for the last 7 years. It's
Awesome.
a great place to visit. Beautiful, lots of tourists. Get about 1 million tourists on cruise ship alone every summer, mostly from the US. So it's a beautiful place to come visit.
Well, it looks beautiful. That is a real backdrop, not a Zoom backdrop.
That's a real backdrop. It really is.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you're here today. This is going to be a great conversation because it does have to do with the medical field and the pharma field with medication. So I would love just to hear, because I think that, when I think about the drug industry, meaning pharmaceutical industry, I know that there's a lot of things that the layperson like me does not know. So there's probably a lot of behind the scenes information. So I would love for you maybe just to tell us about the development of drugs and kind of like the timeline or why it takes so long to actually develop a drug.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So our success rate in developing drugs is not necessarily that great. So it's about a 10,000 to 1 long shot. So for every 10,000 compounds that are discovered at a bench, about 1 makes it through the entire development cycle, through all the different phases of development, and then ends up being approved by the FDA or equivalents in Europe or Canada and different places. And that's because a lot of drugs fail along the way because our bodies are so complex, and things that make so much sense at the bedside or at the bench don't make a lot of sense as you continue to move through the process. So in a nutshell, we move from test tube testing into small animal testing and for looking for safety. And from there, we go through healthy volunteer testing, small trials in the population we're interested in, big trials in the population we're interested in, and then we compile all that information, give it to the FDA. So we've just completed development of one of our drugs, and it's in front of the FDA now, and we're waiting to have our meeting with them. It's about 710,000 pages worth of data that's been compiled, and it's taken about 16 years to develop the drug. And that's about normal because it takes a long time between each study to analyze it, to make sure we're doing the right thing, add additional safety parameters. Our goal number 1 is to make sure that patients are safe and then provide medication.
Yeah, and I bet everything you just said, unless you are in the industry that you serve, they would not know that. I mean, that's a whole bunch of information that kind of just blows my mind.
It's a lot of work. It makes a PhD thesis sound pretty minor in comparison, I have to be honest.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And so 16 years, and that's typical.
Yeah, it's somewhere between 14 to 16 years. And it's just because along the way you have to learn. I mean, it's very simple to make a small amount of drug, enough for a tiny pill bottle, but you're making drugs for potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of patients. And so you have to think about, how do we make this drug in a consistent way all the time? And you have to remember that as companies, we don't do these things internally. We work with a lot of partners. So we work with formulation partners and encapsulation partners, even packaging groups. We work with different statistical groups and central laboratories and different physicians and hospitals and stuff like that. And so a lot of my time, quite honestly, is spent with my colleague, traveling around the globe, talking to different partners that we work with to make sure that we're all doing the right thing and we're invested in the same kind of values.
Yeah, values are important, and to have those aligning. So it sounds to me like relationships are a big part of the work you do. It's not just, the writing of the papers and the research and getting it to pass, but it's actually lands in a lot of relationships. So can you talk to that?
Yeah, I think, whether you think your organization is in relationship with others or not, you really, really are. And to back up just one step, a successful business really requires balance and a set of values that permeate within the organization and within the people who work in the organization and then outside the organization. And that's a critical first step. And a lot of people get very excited about what their business could do, but they forget that you have to implant that in a set of values that you're going to say are. So in our company, for example, we have a set of values on our clinical group where we deal with patients. And we say to new people coming in, if you want to work with our clinical team, that's fine, but you have to agree to the set of values. And we actually make them sign their name on this poster, like 10 feet away from my door here. And it just reminds us that these are the values we're going to live by. We're going to make them consistent. And it's really important to write those things down. And we've seen from numerous studies, the Harvard Written Goal Study or Gail Matthews' work a number of years ago, people who write these things down are much more likely to achieve them than people who don't write them down. So you make these values, you say, this is what I have to live with. And then you write them down and for me, put them on a wall so we all can see them. That's the basis of forming relationships, right? And we think that companies, or even drug companies or pharmaceutical companies, are sort of like these just sort of autonomous beings, and they're not. They actually have relationships. And as Margaret Wheatley said a number of years ago, that real power and energy in organizations is generated through relationship. And that means that organizations, they have systems and they act just like people do. And if you think about it, that sort of makes sense, right? Depending on the size of your company, you have a project manager. They're like the cardiovascular system, right? They keep things pumping and going and hold accountable to timelines. Every time they walk, people are like, oh no, I forgot to do something. But that's their job. They hold us accountable. They keep pumping. And we have immune systems, how we deal with rogue employees or employees that don't share our value statement. And how do we handle them, right? We have musculoskeletal systems. That's the administrative backbone, like our accountants and our lawyers and all these people that sort of support us to allow us to do our job really well. And we even have emotions. So I travel about a third of the year all globally, and I'll email or call my executive assistant, say, these emails are sounding kind of weird. What's going on back home? And there's something I don't know. And you can feel that emotion in the emails. And so, companies have emotions, and so they act like people do. And if they act like people do, that means that they need relationships just like we do. But then it goes back to values, right? Those shared values sort of define the nature of the relationship. And I think that thing is all key. And if I could, I'd like to share one slide that sort of
love that.
relates this whole thing together and sort of allows us to say,
do.
okay, this is what it looks like. So if you look on the screen here, I have this thing called the equilateral triangle. Okay, now we got to go back to grade school just for a minute here.
Okay, I'm ready.
Equilateral triangle. It's this triangle where all three sides are equal, right? And in this case, they all hold an angle of about 60 degrees. Now, why a triangle? So the triangle is the most important structure in architecture. Everything revolves around a triangle because it's the most stable. So even if you think about squares and rectangles, they all have a triangular component to them because it's very, very stable. So here's the neat thing about triangles. All three of those corners share an equal responsibility to keep that triangle, right? So in our case, what we're talking about today, we have one corner is held down by a biotech company like mine. One corner is held by the research doctors and nurses who are working with us. One corner is held by the research organization. So think like central labs, the guys that analyze all the blood work, right? Those are one of the many research organizations we work with. We work with other ones that do statistics or do modeling or look at pharmacokinetics, a fancy way of looking at what the drug does inside the blood. But all of those are centered around the common value of we're here to serve the patient. That's the
Yes.
primary goal. And we really do hold all these groups that partner with us to that same value statement. That's really, really important. It's easy to get research done at what we would call research mills. They just sort of run through research and they really don't have that same sense of ethical boundaries to the patient.
Mm,
They're just looking to get a paycheck. Those aren't partners. Those are just like vendors for us. And so they don't
okay.
hold those same values and those shared values. And so we say it's the patient that drives all of us. But in this little diagram here, this picture, you'll notice that the triangle is not made out of wood or stone or iron. It has to flex. Because if you would imagine in a typical trial, you're in 25 or 30 different countries around the world. You're involving thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of patients involved in this. You have numerous different entities. You have hospitals and labs and physicians and statisticians and all these different groups. And there's give and flex because weird things sometimes happen in the context of a trial in terms of unexpected results, and we need to
Mm,
understand them. And so it has to flex a little bit. Sometimes one corner owns a little bit more than another corner. But at the end of the day, if we have this common purpose, that means that we've agreed on what this is going to look like. And so whether if you look at the bottom of the triangle, like the biotech company directly talking to the physicians, we still agree on the patient, or whether it's the doctors talking to the research organizations or the biotech company talking to the research organizations, we share those same values. And each one of those has different kinds of skills, but it's all
mhm.
centered around the patient. So this is sort of what guides us and it has guided us successfully over all these years, is the fact that we share this common boundary around patients, and we're going to do what's the right thing for patients first. If we hold that, we're, I think, more likely to be successful.
Yeah, I love that. I love the analogy of that triangle, and the patient is central
Mm,
to that, and that your values obviously need to align with the other people that you're doing the work with. So I love that.
yeah, thanks.
I love that. And
Yeah,
that's interesting because everybody who is part of that triangle, you have to be on the same page. So if the patient isn't your first concern, then you should not be part of your team of people that you're working with, I'm assuming.
yeah, no, that's very true. So sometimes when I give a talk and I'll talk to research groups about this, and I'll say, if this doesn't guide you, you should be into, drilling for oil or,
Something else.
cutting down trees, anything else, but don't do this. I mean, just think about it. If we willingly choose to hide data or mistakes, people really get hurt. And so we have
Hmm.
to say that the patient's safety is just it's paramount. It's at the very front of everything we do. And that means if you have unexpected findings, you have to be willing to say, well, that was not what we expected. Okay, we're going to spend some time and investigate that. Make sure we really understand it before we go on to the next stage of research, because we want to make sure that we understand. And at the end of the day, when we have a meeting with the regulator, so in the case of the US, the FDA, when we meet with the FDA, they're going to ask us those kind of questions. You had this kind of unexpected finding happen in your clinical trial. Tell me what you think it means and how are we keeping patients safe through all of this? Because their responsibility is, if I've tested it in, let's say, 1,000 people, this medication may be used by 1 million people or 10 million people or 20 million people. We really want to make sure we're holding that value right at the very forefront of everything we do.
Sure do. And it kind of reminds me about what's happening in our world, and this may be a little off topic, and you can answer or not, depending on your thinking. I'm just wondering, as COVID-19, as we progress through, and we have, we're looking for uh, what is
A
it called?
vaccine, a
Thank
vaccine.
you.
You're welcome.
Vaccine.
Yeah,
That word.
yeah.
We're looking for a vaccine, and it seems like we're coming along, but very quickly. And so when I heard you first say, 16 years for a drug to be totally, wrapped up, signed, sealed, delivered, typical. And then I think about the vaccine
Mm.
that many different people are working on. Would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, the good news is that vaccine development is on the backbone of already understood technology. So a lot of those things
Okay.
we don't have to reinvent. We can just add on to that.
Mhm.
But what's really important, again, as we look at these vaccines, again, is patient safety, right? Just really thinking about what's happening to the immune system. So one of my areas of expertise, as you mentioned, is immunosuppression. So trying to turn down the immune system from autoimmune disease. And that's not directly virology, but it's very closely related to virology, right? Where the immune system gets turned on or
Yeah.
not gets turned on for whatever reason. And so we just need to really carefully think about patient safety along the way. I know there's a lot of pressure for companies that are in the vaccine space to
Mhm.
try to find an effective and safe treatment for COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes
Yes.
the disease COVID-19. And I know they're really working their best. And my hope is that they will continue to hold those same sense of values as we move forward, because there's a lot of pressure to get it done quickly.
Mhm.
Sometimes when we shortcut the process, we see really unexpected results happen, and not good unexpected results. So
Yeah.
yeah, I know these guys. Well, I don't know them personally. Obviously, most companies hold the same sense of shared values. So
Mhm.
able to build on previously existing technology and then try to leap forward to the next step. So we certainly need that vaccine to come forward. It's going to make a big difference for how we operate, over the rest of,
Yes.
whether or not even this year, but in next year. So,
Yes.
because this is
Absolutely.
around for a while.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
You're welcome.
And so with a vaccine, or with whether it's that, or whether it's a drug that uh,
Mhm.
your drugs that you're producing, when you think about test subjects, so these are people, these are relationships that you establish, I'm assuming. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? So tell me a little bit about the test subjects in your
Yeah.
world and what that
So
looks like.
I can wind back a whole bunch of years as to how I started. So I started as an investigator in nephrology and kidney disease. And companies would come to approach me and say, hey, we have this drug. Would you be interested in working with us on the development of this drug? And we'd say, yeah, this sounds really interesting, and we think it has value. So I would actually be responsible for bringing patients in my center into clinical trials and talking to them about that. I loved doing that. I really, really did. It was an opportunity for patients to be empowered and
Mm,
take control of something that was happening outside their life they may not be able to take control of otherwise.
yeah.
And our responsibility as investigators, as research physicians and nurses, is to explain, here's all the data that we know. Now, there may be some things that we don't know, but we're going to do our very best to keep you as safe as possible
Mm,
and to understand what's going on. And so we would have this relationship with patients where they would understand their responsibilities and our responsibilities, because there's responsibilities for patients too, right? They have to say,
imagine there are.
yeah, over the course of, let's say, a year, I agree to come in over these intervals, and I'll be seen during these intervals and have blood work taken. And I promise to take the medication as you prescribe it, so that we can see whether the medication works or not. And I'm also going to report any potential side effects. We learn so much from patients when they come in and say, listen, this sounds kind of weird, but I got a weird itching in my ear and I'm not really sure what it means. And we'll say, I'm glad you shared this. We will
Mm,
record that down, because it may turn out that this drug may work, but it may cause ear itchiness. And we just don't know until we
yes.
compile all that data. And it's just important to know, because sometimes you see the advertisements on TV and they have that tiny little writing at the bottom. You'd like to know if ear itchiness is part of that or not, or whether it's something a little more significant. But that's the
That's
role of,
right.
that's the role of the patients. And I don't get to see patients like that anymore, right? I'm far removed from the patients, but I'm not removed from the patient data. I see every individual's patient's data as a whole, so I can display it on a screen
Okay.
and understand that patient's. And I used to tell our staff that worked in labs in our company that a tube of blood that you analyze, that belongs to a 33-year-old mother of two, and
Mm,
she's lost her job because of this
mm,
disease. And you should never forget that, because when you analyze that blood sample looking for how much drug is in the blood or what kind of electrolytes are in there or whatever it is that we're measuring, that belongs to that mom. And she's
mhm.
counting on you to do your job really well, so we can find out the answer whether this drug is effective or not. And that was really helpful for lab staff. It's, again, bringing patient to the center of this whole discussion, just
Yes.
reminding them of that. Well, I can tell you that both myself and my colleagues in the clinical side of things, individually, we see every single patient's data. We never look
Mm,
at it as just a lump of data. It's just like, well, this looks kind of interesting. Let's sort of move on. We look at every individual patient. That's part of our responsibility for patients. So having patients, and I don't even like to use the word test subject. I like to say they co-partner with us in
Co-partner, I
drug
love that.
and
Mm-hmm.
and it allows them. So we're studying diseases, let's say like lupus nephritis, so inflammation in your kidneys because of
Mm-hmm.
lupus. We get to tell patients, you get to co-partner with us, and we get to together find out whether this medication may have value for lupus nephritis. Let's find out together.
That's
And
so
that's
good.
really exciting. I say to my kids that I won't know these patients' real life story because I see data,
Mm-hmm.
but the opportunity to help hundreds of thousands of patients worldwide. What a wonderful
So
gift. I mean,
gratifying, I imagine.
absolutely. I mean, I always
Yeah.
joke they pay me for the job. They shouldn't, because the gratification from the work alone is immense. And if we get another, a drug approved in this indication where nothing's been approved so far, what a wonderful opportunity that is. Those don't come
Mm-hmm.
around. That's a great deal.
So it sounds like perhaps patients should not be afraid to, sign up. What
Yeah.
does that even look like? So, because I've never been part of a drug trial, so if somebody, is listening to this and perhaps, um, sees that somewhere, some company, whether it's yours or somewhere else, is looking for subjects, patients, co-partners,
Yeah.
for their trials. What does that whole process look like?
Well, normally what happens is that they'll come into wherever that center is that's doing that kind of research. They'll be asked just some background questions. And then what will happen is they'll be given an information sheet. It's a patient-informed consent. Sometimes they're a little bit long, but it's their opportunity to ask lots of questions.
Mm.
And they should never feel rushed to do this decision. They should never
Yes.
feel pressured to make this decision. And I would say to patients all the time, this may not be the right clinical trial for you, and that's okay. We're still going to treat same care and attention that we did before it. It's fine, right? And so patients should have that opportunity to ask lots of questions, as many questions as they feel necessary to be comfortable. And we know based on family dynamics that in some groups, they'll bring along their aunt or uncle or their mom or their dad. That's okay too. You need to bring along to hear the information, so they can hear it with different ears than you or I might hear it. And so you can make a really good informed decision. That's why it's called the informed consent form. And here's the great news about that form. That form, while it says, I agree to do this, informed consent is a process that happens over the context of the whole trial.
Mm.
Every time you come back to that research group, say, hey, man, how's it going? And what are you guys hearing? And what's happening? And what's happening with me? And what do you think about this ear itchiness that I talked about earlier? Do you think that,
Yes.
let's, and it's a great opportunity. Informed consent is just not a signature on a piece of paper. It's that relationship, again, between the patient and the research group, as they continue to go down that journey together. Patients that approach it like that tend to end up being very empowered. They feel very comfortable taking the medication. They come back for the visit. We don't like to use the word necessary compliance, but some groups say those are the compliant patients, but they're patients that understand why they're co-partnering with the drug company and with the
Mm-hmm.
research group and with everybody. And if you think about it, they're partnering with thousands of people worldwide
Yes.
because we're all agreeing to do this at the same time. That's a pretty cool thing to say. I'm working with patients in Germany or Japan or
Mm-hmm.
Guatemala or Canada or wherever. We're all down this journey together. And it's really the only way we can find answers, especially for some rare diseases that are tough to find treatments for. The patients need to get together, whether formally or informally, and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're going to do this and we're trying to solve this thing because we desperately need patients to work with us.
Yeah, because otherwise you can't move forward, right? I mean, you can do animal
Not at all.
testing, but once it moves into
Yeah,
the people process, right? You need those people.
absolutely. We have unbelievably sophisticated computer models, and they will never replace
Mm.
people, because we're all a little bit different. We're all actually a little bit weird in terms of how our bodies work. And so it's good to get that information. And the only way you can do that is actually have people work with us.
I've been told, a doctor, I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, he's like, "You're an enigma." I'm like, I am
You,
unique.
you.
Thank you for recognizing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, just think about your immune system for a second. It's so robust. I mean, it has so many different pathways. There's not one pathway. There's tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of different pathways by which your immune system's turned on and off, and
Mm,
subsegmented, turned on and off, and how the cells move around your body to find or fight infections or disease and stuff like that. It's so complicated. The only way we're really going to know is to have patients work with us.
yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to hear an example about how you've changed the life of a person in drug development.
Yeah, I get pretty emotional talking about this kind of stuff.
Mm.
Um, in the case of transplant patients, so kidney transplant patients, one of my backgrounds, we were using our drug to see if it would be an effective anti-rejection treatment. And the study was coming to an end. We had done our study and we'd found out positive results, and that was really exciting. The study was coming to an end. And I had a family from the New York area contact me and say, listen, we don't want the study to end. What do we need to do to continue to use the drug? And I said, well, listen, the study's actually over. We're done the research part of this. And they were really positively emphatic for what do we need to do to help to continue to get this drug, because we believe in it so much and it's helped our family member so much. And we moved, a lot of hurdles to try to get access of drug to this patient, who remains on it to this day, 12 years
Oh,
post-transplant.
oh my
And the
goodness.
patient's doing great. And I love to hear the stories and see the data from this individual. I've never actually met this patient, but I've heard through these family members saying, what's happened to this family member's lives and how they're doing. And that's unbelievably gratifying, to know that we're making a difference in patients. My colleagues have had people approach them at conferences, for diseases like lupus nephritis, where if a mom will come up and say, you've changed the life of my child because she's on the medication that you're taking. We've all had experiences like that over the years, where people come up to us say, you've helped change my family member's life. You've
Mm,
changed my life because I'm taking the medication that I know you worked on. Wow, what a gift, man. That's crazy.
yeah, that's beautiful. And the thing is that from what you said, earlier, you empower them, right? And so you
Absolutely.
may be providing them, with the actual, drug that they're taking, but you're also empowering them in a different way, and that's beautiful. I mean, to
Yeah.
receive that back.
Yeah, yeah. And in my old life, when I was at the University of Alberta still, I mean, we'd see these positive results, and these patients would go on to maintain their kidney transplant or be more successful in their dialysis treatments or whatever it was in terms of what we were researching. And you could see them, you just sort of smile on the inside, because it's just kind of a
Mm,
great deal, really, when you
yes.
get to change the lives of people. What a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's good work that you're doing.
Thanks.
And,
Myself and a
like,
lot of other people. So,
yeah, right. Well, here's the thing, like I said in the beginning, people who aren't, in the industry that you're in, um, we don't understand these things,
mm,
right? And
mm,
so, we may think, why is a drug taking so long? Or, the test subjects, co-partners, that I love how you call them that. There may be some bumps in the road or whatnot, but in the end, I mean, you are doing good work,
yeah, thanks.
and empowering.
I accept that on behalf of all the people that work on these drugs worldwide in different companies, because we're all really trying to make a difference in the lives of patients.
Mm,
It is a wonderful opportunity. And if you don't, like we said, that partway on, if you don't believe in this, go ahead and be involved in lumber mills or whatever, which is all fine. It's all fine. But for this, you have to really have a heart for patients. And most of the people that work in our industry, you come from a background of caring for patients, whether you're a pharmacologist
mm,
or a statistician or a physician or a nurse or a nurse practitioner or a social worker, or right. A lot of us have those kind of clinical backgrounds, and we see this as an opportunity to do the same thing, just in a slightly different way.
yeah, and that's okay, because we are all called to do different things, and to
Absolutely.
and to add value, to other people, to the
Yeah.
world, and whatnot. So that's
Yeah.
wonderful. I typically ask, as I close, I typically ask for some practical tips, or whatnot. How can we kind of talk about practical application or practical tips around what you do, like for
I would go
people who
right
are
back to,
listening?
yeah, I would go right back to the beginning, and we talked about, values.
Mm-hmm.
You really, whether you're in drug development or not, it doesn't make a difference. You really need to align your values with your business development plan.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we believe in our organization? How do we define success? Because that's really important, how you define success. And how would our partners define success? So whether you're
Mm-hmm.
making soap at home and you're selling it to craft, stores in your home or something like that, or in your town, you basically want to say, how do we define success, and how do the people that we're going to get the soap and have them sell it on our behalf, how do they define success? How do we meld those things together? And you're going to find there's a lot more commonality than you might believe. And this really, really works. One of the people who's a real shining light in our business, a guy named Bill George, who ran a company called Medtronic, tiny little company, except it's a huge company. And he was emphatic about the company staying to what he called, the North Star, the true North. We've heard these
Mm-hmm.
expressions before. These are our principles, our guiding principles. And he took that company from, 1.1 billion from a market cap, so these size company, 460 billion
Wow.
over his tenure as a CEO. And he was relentless for saying we have to follow our values. So it's not just these are feel-good phrases. They're actually really good for your business from a practical point of view. So, you need to write down these organizational values, put them on a wall. You can see them on a regular basis, because we all fall short of our values over time. And it's a good reminder. And the staff that work with me will say, hey, Rob, you're not really following that value of, no griping and complaining. Oh, you're right. I'm truly sorry. Okay, I'll stop.
Difficulties on that conversation there at the end, but I would like to just go ahead and close and thank you to Dr. Huizinga for coming on Conversations for Leaders and Teams and really unpacking how, he and his team, along with anybody who truly is in this industry of pharma, how they are making a difference in the lives of patients. And so much of that is through developing relationships within that, as well as aligning values to align that with the business development plan, as he said, and how important that is to define what does success look like for your organization, as well as what does success look like, as he said, to the patients who are coming into the pharma trials. So thank you again, Dr. Huizinga. And until next time, keep doing great things. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.